7 of history's most devastating dam failures. Different countries, different decades, different designs. But behind every catastrophe was the same pattern: a warning seen too late, a weakness dismissed, and a wall of water no town could outrun. These are the failures that erased communities from the map. Dale Dyke Dam. On March 11, 1864, the new reservoir above Sheffield was almost full for the first time. The 95-foot earth dam supplied a city growing on steel, mills, and steam. Below it, families lived close to the river because that was where the work was. That evening, a man crossing the crest noticed a crack. It was narrow enough to step over, but unusual enough that the chief engineer was called from Sheffield. Workers opened the outlet, but the reservoir fell by inches while pressure remained against the embankment. Shortly before midnight, the center of the embankment gave way. The reservoir released roughly 114 million cubic feet of water into the Loxley Valley. The flood struck mills first, adding timber, boilers, carts, and pieces of houses to the wave. It reached the crowded districts of Sheffield while most people were asleep. Official records counted 240 dead. 100 buildings and 15 bridges were destroyed, and around 4,000 homes were flooded. Compensation records suggest that even the official list may have missed people whose deaths came later. The inquiry could not agree on one simple cause. It considered movement beneath the embankment and weaknesses in the clay trench intended to seal it. Modern investigations suggest that settlement may have cracked the clay core, allowing internal erosion to grow where no one could see it. The visible crack was not the beginning of the failure. It was the final surface sign of a failure already moving through the embankment. The warning was real. The time left to act was not. Gleno Dam. High in the Italian Alps, Gleno was supposed to be a solid gravity dam, a massive wall that resisted water through its own weight. Then, while construction was underway, the project changed. The upper structure became a line of thin arches supported by concrete buttresses, built on a foundation prepared for the earlier plan. Oversight was weak. Later proceedings described poor materials, poor workmanship, and inadequate supervision. Approval of the revised design did not catch up with construction until the dam was nearly complete. In the autumn of 1923, heavy rain filled the reservoir. It was the first complete filling, the moment when every joint, foundation, and buttress finally had to carry the full load together. At about 6:30 on the morning of December 1st, a buttress near the center failed. Several arches followed, opening a gap in the dam. Nearly 4.5 million cubic meters of water accelerated through the narrow mountain channel. It destroyed Bugio, struck Dedzo, swept away power stations and factories, and continued for roughly 13 miles. The wave reached Darfo about 45 minutes after the breach. At least 356 people died. The surviving sections still stand on opposite sides of the valley. Between them is an empty space where the central structure separated from the base beneath it. Gleno was the final result of decisions made in sequence: alter the design, continue the work, accept weak control, and fill the reservoir. Afterward, Italy created a technical commission to inspect large dams, and the collapse changed the country's dam regulations. The reservoir tested the whole chain at once. It failed at the connection between what had originally been designed and what was ultimately built. St. Francis Dam. In the 1920s, Los Angeles depended on an aqueduct carrying water across hundreds of miles of dry country. St. Francis was built as emergency storage, about 40 miles northwest of the city. Its designer was William Mulholland, the celebrated engineer whose aqueduct had made the growth of Los Angeles possible. The concrete dam rose nearly 200 feet inside San Francisquito Canyon. As the reservoir filled, leaks appeared. Some seepage was expected, so the dam keeper recorded the flows and watched for changes. On March 12, 1928, he found water on the western side that looked muddy. Mud can mean a leak is carrying material out of a foundation. Mulholland and his assistant inspected it, concluded that the color came from loose soil outside the structure, and declared the dam safe. At 11:57 that night, the dam failed. No witness at the structure survived to describe the first movement. A wall of water, mud, trees, concrete, and boulders moved through San Francisco Canyon and into the Santa Clara River Valley. The first communities had almost no warning. Farther downstream, telephone operators and police tried to move people from its path. The water continued for 5.5 hours and reached the Pacific near Oxnard, about 70 miles away. More than 450 people were killed. 900 houses were destroyed, along with roads, bridges, farms, and work camps. The exact number of dead can never be known because migrant laborers and entire families disappeared without complete records. Investigations blamed poor construction and an unstable site. One abutment stood against ancient landslide material. The other contained fractured rock that weakened when saturated. At the reservoir's highest level, pressure acted on a foundation that could not safely transfer the load. Mulholland accepted public responsibility, and his career ended. California then created its dam safety program. New dams would no longer depend only on the confidence of their designer. Plans, foundations, construction, maintenance, and existing structures would face independent state review. The muddy leak mattered, but the deeper warning was the belief that one inspection by the same authority that built the dam was enough to declare it safe. Malpasset Dam. Above Fréjus on the French Riviera, Malpasset looked almost impossibly thin. It was a double curvature concrete arch, 218 feet high, but only about 22 feet thick at its widest point. Instead of resisting the reservoir only through mass, its curved wall transferred the force of the water into the rock on both sides of the valley. That made the foundation part of the structure. If the rock moved, the arch could not simply stand on its own. Construction ended in 1954, and the reservoir filled slowly for 5 years. In late November of 1959, heavy rain pushed it toward a level it had never reached. Operators opened the outlet, but the water continued to rise. At about 9:10 on the night of December 2nd, the left abutment moved. Cracks crossed the concrete almost instantly, and the arch broke apart. The flood descended the Rayran Valley at highway speed. Near the dam, reports described a wave close to 100 feet high. It tore through farms, roads, and the outskirts of Fréjus, throwing vehicles and railway equipment aside. Access routes disappeared, delaying rescue. 421 people were killed. After the reservoir emptied, much of the foundation rock had vanished with the left side. Investigators found a fault downstream, and layers in the gneiss angled toward it. As reservoir pressure increased, uplift accumulated beneath the abutment and displaced the thrust block carrying the arch into the valley wall. The exact mechanism had not been understood, but the geological investigation before construction was limited. The dam had been optimized to be extraordinarily thin, while the rock carrying its load had not been examined with equal depth. The concrete did what an arch is designed to do. It passed the pressure outward. The failure occurred where that pressure was supposed to disappear safely into the mountain. South Fork Dam. 14 river miles above Johnstown, Pennsylvania, an earth dam held Lake Conemaugh, 2.5 miles long, nearly a mile wide, and as much as 70 feet deep. It contained about 20 million tons of water. The valley below was filled with mills and tightly packed industrial communities. Built for a state canal system, The dam was later purchased by the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club, an exclusive retreat whose members included some of the wealthiest industrialists in America. Repairs restored the lake, but not its original safety features. Discharge pipes were never replaced, leaving no reliable way to lower the reservoir. The crest was lowered for a road. Screens across the spillway kept fish inside, but also trapped debris. On May 31, 1889, relentless rain raised the lake by about an inch every 10 minutes. Workers tried to raise the crest and clear the spillway. Warnings went down the valley, but damaged communications and earlier false alarms made people skeptical. At about 3:10 in the afternoon, the dam opened. The lake stripped houses, trees, telegraph poles, railroad cars, and pieces of factories into a moving mass. People downstream heard continuous thunder. A dark cloud of spray and debris appeared before the water. The wave reached Johnstown at 4:07. 57 minutes passed between breach and impact, but the broken warning system made that time almost useless. When the flood entered the city, streets became channels and buildings lifted from their foundations. At the stone bridge, debris piled against the arches and caught fire. Flood survivors were trapped inside the burning wreckage. 2,209 people died. More than 1,600 homes were lost. Hundreds of victims were never identified. Modern analysis gives weight to the lowered crest, obstructed spillway, absent outlet pipes, and inadequate repair. The club and its members were never held legally responsible. The most disturbing number in Johnstown is not the height of the wave. It is 57 minutes, nearly an hour in which the danger was moving toward a populated valley, while no warning system could make the people below believe it was real. Machhu Dam II. The dam stood a few miles upstream of Morbi in Gujarat, India. It had a masonry spillway with 18 gates in the center and long earthen embankments on both sides. On August 10, 1979, an extreme storm covered the basin. By 1:30 the next morning, operators had opened every functioning gate. 3 were not working properly. Even with nearly 200,000 cubic feet passing every second, the reservoir continued to rise. Around noon, All India Radio told people to move to higher ground. But communications from the site failed, and no official message announced when the structure began to break. Early that afternoon, water flowed over both earthen embankments. Earth dams resist pressure from behind. They are not designed for uncontrolled water racing down their outer face. The overflow cut into the soil and released about 90,000 acre-feet into an already flooded river. Lillipar, the nearest town, had largely followed the warning. In Morbi, seasonal flooding was familiar. Many assumed this was another ordinary monsoon rise. Others moved to places that had been safe before, but were not high enough now. In Vajapur, residents gathered inside a temple that had survived an earlier flood. The wave entered the building and killed more than 100 people. It continued into Morbi, destroying homes, factories, bridges, and the market district. No reliable final toll exists. Estimates range from about 1,800 to 25,000. Rapid mass cremations intended to prevent disease began before identification and record-keeping could be completed. The official inquiry was dissolved without a final report. A later study estimated a lower peak inflow than the government claimed, but still found overtopping inevitable because inflow far exceeded the spillway's capacity. The rebuilt dam received more than 4 times the original discharge capacity. Morbi was warned that water was coming. What it did not receive was a warning large enough, specific enough, and trusted enough to describe what that water would become. Banqiao Dam. In Hunan Province, China, Banqiao was called the Iron Dam, a structure believed capable of surviving anything the Ru River could send against it. Built in the early 1950s, it developed cracks and sluice gate problems soon after completion, then was repaired, reinforced, and raised. Its design storm was roughly a 1 in 1,000-year event, just under 21 inches of rain across 3 days. Then came Typhoon Nina. In August of 1975, the storm moved inland, collided with a cold front, and stalled over southern Hunan. Beginning on August 5th, nearly 18 inches of rain fell across the region. Banqiao approached maximum capacity on the first day. The sluice gates opened, but silt prevented full discharge. The rising reservoir flooded the management offices and cut telephone contact. Operators could not receive instructions or clearly report conditions, and officials did not treat the Iron Dam as the most urgent threat. The rain continued for 16 hours on the second day, then another 13 hours on the third. Late on August 7th, water crossed the crest. Workers formed a human chain and tried to protect the embankment as the overflow cut into it. At about 1 in the morning on August 8th, Banqiao disintegrated. The wave carried nearly 500,000 acre-feet at more than 30 miles an hour. In places, it was over 30 feet deep. The flood spread more than 7 miles wide and covered about 3 million acres. No adequate warning reached the nearest villages. In Qianhu, an estimated 63% of the population died. Across the region, Banqiao and 61 other dams failed. Some collapsed in sequence, others were overwhelmed by the same storm. The flood was only the first catastrophe. Millions were stranded where roads, communications, clean water, food distribution, and medical care had broken down together. Much of the food dropped from aircraft landed in contaminated water. Disease, infection, hunger, and exposure continued to kill. The toll changes depending on what is counted. China's official figure is 26,000 deaths. A government study cited 85,000 immediate deaths before that figure was withdrawn. A 1995 Human Rights Watch report cited 230,000, most from famine and disease after the flood. For decades, reporting was suppressed and government records remained confidential. Banqiao was rebuilt in 1993 with far greater discharge capacity. The storm was extraordinary. But rain alone did not create the scale of the disaster. The dam had limited flood capacity, gates that could not discharge fully, communications vulnerable to the reservoir, no redundant warning system, and a reputation for invincibility that delayed recognition of danger. Banqiao did not erase one town. It broke the systems that allowed an entire region to survive after the water passed. 7 dams, 7 valleys, different designs, different decades, and different ways to fail. None of these disasters began at the instant the wall broke. They began earlier, in a decision, an assumption, a missing inspection, an undersized outlet, or a warning that could not reach the people below. A dam can fail in minutes. The conditions that make it possible are usually built over years.